All right, guys, thanks for getting together. This is going to be our first attempt at a live design and product review. We've got a new project that we're working on at Buzzsprout, and we're calling it the Podroll. Actually, we're not calling it the Podroll. We're calling it podcast recommendations. But the tag that we're building off of is the Podroll tag, which is a new tag that has been adopted by the Podcast Namespace project. It's a phase 6 tag. And we're super excited about how it can help our podcasters recommend other podcasts that they're listening to their audience. So far, this project has been really just Dave and Bryan. Dave's the lead designer on the project, and Bryan is the tech lead for the project. And they've been working mostly on their own. All the communication that we've had on this project so far has been asynchronous. So it's through our project management software that we use. It's a tool called Basecamp. And we've exchanged messages and screenshots. But the way that we start and do all of our work here is that we capture an idea, we pitch it, which is kind of like a scope document. We write it up, what the goal of the project is that we're trying to achieve. We assign a team. That team for this project is Dave and Bryan. And then they work on that project. And as they need feedback or as they're approaching completion, they will bring it to Cameron for design feedback and myself for product feedback. Since this project is smaller, we're combining multiple meetings into one. And so this is a design and product review, and we're looking at something that is nearing completion. Not complete, but probably 80 to 90% complete. And so this is Cameron and I's real first look at this project, and we thought we'd share it to anyone who's interested to see how stuff gets built behind the scenes at Buzzsprout. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave, who can walk us through the project. And Dave, maybe give us a little overview of what the tag does, the problem that we're trying to solve for our customers, and then just walk us through the solution.
Yeah, so the Podroll that we're kind of calling it right now, at least internally, is a way for people to, if they have podcasters, have other podcasts that they would like to recommend for their listeners. We are giving a way to do that where they can search and find other podcasts. And once they add that, it can go on their public website as well as like the podcast 2.0 namespace updates, that it'll be there as well. So we give them a tool in the admin, and then it shows up in other places, hopefully, to, for their listeners to hopefully find those and see podcasts that the podcasts they listen to also might recommend or they might find interesting. So
right. So today we'll see that it shows up on their public website. It'll also update their RSS feed and live in there for any apps that want to use that information to display it however they want to. And as far as I know, right now, the only one doing that is Podfans, which is a web-based podcast listening app. But we're hoping other apps that usually adopt podcast namespace features quickly, like Fountain, Castmatic, Podfriend. There's a bunch of other ones. You can go to newpodcastapps.com and check them all out there. But we're hoping they will adopt these and start showing them quickly. Oh, the podnews.net also shows Podroll tags.
Gotcha. Yeah, so let me, I can share my screen and so we can start looking at some of the stuff we have so far.
While you're doing that, it's worth noting that this concept harkens back to the early 2000s when we were all blogging and had blog rolls. We would feature our favorite blogs in our sidebars or that sort of thing. So it's fun to see this come full circle 2 decades later.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the original inspiration for this whole conversation that took place in the podcast namespace project. Was blogging was so fun when it was completely open and organic, and bloggers building upon the technology themselves. And we wanted to look back and see if there's any fun stuff that we could bring forward into podcasting today. All right, Dave.
All right. You guys can see this, right? Index page. Okay, so so this is the index page. It's like the homepage where everyone lands when they're using Buzzsprout. And where I place is in the podcast info. If you go to podcast info up top, and then recommended podcasts is kind of what we have internally in the admin right now. We're not sure a Podroll to the average person yet is the right way to go, but we're still working on some of that language. And right now it's, recommended podcast might be the way to go or something like that. So if we click in here, we can see you're going to place to add a podcast now.
I would hang on one sec. Can we talk about that Podroll name for a second?
Yeah.
So I've been obviously back and forth on this. You've seen this in some of the messages I've posted. But I think the question I have for this group gathered today is, do you think do we have a chance of convincing people that Podroll is like what we call these things in the podcaster world anyway? Like I see it in this context of someone has navigated to the podcast info section, and then there are a bunch of subsections within the section. Recommended podcasts to me is just as kind of obscure a concept as Podroll would be. And so I feel like if we're going to convince our customers to click on this, we have just as good a chance calling it Podroll as we do recommended podcasts, because they're probably just curious about what that is. And if that is true, if they're going to be just as curious whether it be called recommended podcast or Podroll, is it an opportunity to introduce the term Podroll and educate customers and get them excited about calling this feature by its true name?
I mean, I'd be interested to hear. I've lived with it for last week or two. I'd be interested to hear Cameron's thoughts at least, real quick.
I think for the tech veterans, the Podroll is going to resonate relatively quickly, but that's not a huge segment of our audience, not at least the majority. So I think it's going to be a roll of the dice, whatever title we use. So I guess in the moment, I would say let's roll the dice with Podroll and kick the tires on that and see how that plays out. I think there's an opportunity to kind of capture that phrase and leverage maybe some of the historical aspects of it. And I think at the end of the day, though, it's going to be neutral as far as the actual title for this thing. So I don't know. I lean to Podroll.
Yeah, there's something.
I like that. I was going to say I like that because it, from the technical perspective, because it's the names we're using on the back end, so it lines up pretty nicely.
There's something I really like about this concept of hearing podcasters talk to each other and them asking like, oh, what's the name of your podcast? It sounds like we've got a connection. I'd really like to add you to my Podroll, as opposed to I'd like to add you to my list of recommended podcasts, which feels like that could just be a list that lives in your diary or a Post-it note on your desk, but that ambiguity goes away if we can help podcasters understand what a Podroll is and you would want to be in someone's Podroll.
Yeah, I think that's more important to maintain throughout, the theme of what we're seeing here, what you guys will present today. And that is, this is very personal to the podcast, to the hosts. This is something that they're cultivating. This is not an algorithm or things like that. And so I think the more we can make it feel like that, more personal, more humanistic, I think the better it's going to play out, not just on their site, not just here in the UI, but like you're saying, in personal conversations on social media, et cetera.
Yeah, I think there's another audience member. It's their listener. Do we want what verbiage do we want to use for them? As we'll get into this, like that's on the public website. Like what's is there a title that wraps around what these things are? Do we have to educate them on what a Podroll is, or is it like, oh well, we just want to say this is what they recommend. These are other podcasts, that they recommend. Like there's that other audience too that we can try and figure out as well.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know if it's the same verbiage used in both places. But the nice thing is that we do have the flexibility to change it once we look at it in that context and see if something different feels better over there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think we can keep that conversation going, but I'll kind of jump into how it's functioning right now. So again, we use this, if you want to add one, we use this add button, which we use also in the host and co-host section that you can kind of see here. We, reuse this element. So what they do is they click on it and it pops a modal where we have a title of hopefully to indicate what they can do. So again, search for one. This is one of our podcasts, how to start a podcast. And again, this is searching the podcast index. And again, when you click add a podcast, it drops it in. Gives the large artwork, the title, the author, and then an option to remove it. And so right now, I mean, they can go in and we can add a couple, and then we can talk about some of the other stuff that's in there. We got Buzzcast, add it in, make it really simple and quick. Some of the things I think we started talking about already is, you can drag these around to reorder them, but maybe the idea is maybe visually there's not a queue there for people to be able to know that they can drag them. They can click on them and right now it launches the homepage for their podcast index homepage. There's other things to consider there. We could have a public website URL from the RSS feed. We could be able to figure out there if they have an Apple podcast link. So it's those kind of things we got to figure out maybe where these links take them to. If they want to remove and click on it, we give them a confirmation to remove, and then we take it away. They can add as many as they want right now. There's no limit. And yeah, so that's kind of how at least the admin is working. If you guys have any another one of our podcasts I can add and things like that. So
yeah, so let's walk through this. Yeah, let's walk through this a little slower, because on the screen share, at least on my side, you're moving quickly, and so it's taking a while to come through on the screen share.
Sure.
So can you give me a demo in like ultra slow mo? So hit add,
no problem.
And just start typing like 1 to 2 characters at a time. I'm curious, like at what point we start showing search results.
Okay, yeah. So if you add, and I think right off the bat we're hitting that right when you type a letter.
So Bryan, talk to me about that. Are you making a call to the Podcast Index API on every letter stroke?
No, we debounce the input. So there's if there's a small pause when you're typing, that's when we make the request. So I think right now it's set to like 500 milliseconds, which is what we typically use. But we can adjust that. So if you feel like it's making the request too many times or not quickly enough, like we can.
Okay. And is this straight up Podcast Index search results in their returned order? So Dave, back up a little bit just for how to. Okay. So how to, the Podcast Index is returning how to start a podcast is the top result for that query.
Yeah. We're not doing anything from the Podcast Index API to like sort these or anything, to prefer Buzzsprout or something like that. These are just the results, and we put them in there as they're returned to us.
Okay. So like the fourth option down there, real estate uncensored. I don't see how to in the title. It looks like it's in the description.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the search API we're using is sort of like it'll match on a number of different data points. I can't remember exactly what the endpoint is, but essentially it's like this phrase that you're typing in. And so it'll pull back as many search results as it thinks it's relevant.
Okay. Is there a possibility of limiting the query to only podcast titles?
Yeah, I believe we can search by the title alone. So that's something we can look into if you think that's going to be sort of a more accurate representation of what our customers' expectations would be on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think what I feel like this UI is asking me to do is type in a podcast title. Now, that said, it's possible that like I might be searching for a person's name. The example I'm thinking is Tim Ferriss, but that's the Tim Ferriss podcast, so that would probably work. Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income is the title. If you type Pat Flynn, what type of results do you get, Dave? Like now, I think he actually says it's Smart Passive Income with Pat Flynn, so it would probably work. FLYNN.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, you would actually need the search to be working the way it is now to capture that Pat Flynn because it's not in the title. Cameron, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was doing a couple searches. I've got it running in on my browser locally here too, and I did a search for Gruber. Do a search for Gruber, Gruber. And you'll get what I was expecting to be one of the first results, and that is the talk show. Now he and Ben Thompson run another show called Dithering, which we don't see here, and I think it's because Ben is listed first as the host and John second. So I think there's going to need to be flexibility for searching both hosts as well as titles. And another interesting one I found, though, if you'll type in, let's do Jordan's podcast, Dreamful.
There's if you write John Gruber.
There's John. So now he shows up with the second one, Dithering Talk Show. Those are both the John Gruber. Or Dithering, the fourth one as well. So now do Jordan's Dreamful podcast. I found this one interesting because I don't think it shows up at all anywhere.
I wonder if it's in the index.
Results. And in fact, none of the results are matching that term at all. So I'm curious where that might be pulling from. Why are we not getting Jordan's podcast, which is titled Dreamful? That's it.
I thought it was Dreamful Bedtime Stories, or is it just Dreamful now?
It might be. But there it is. But it's interesting it doesn't kill.
So you've got to complete the...
It's interesting it doesn't do that. Especially since there's probably no other podcast with the word Dreamful in it.
What were the results again for just Dreamful?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, let me look at them again for just Dreamful. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't show up there. Another podcast I listen to is Short History of. And if you type in, try Short History, and just stop there, I don't think it comes up in this first set of results. And if you type Short History of, I think it still doesn't come up. Let's test that. So just of. Yeah, so it's not there. Now add the ellipsis at the end, ... Now there it is. There's the first one on the result. I think this could be problematic for people that would have to type in almost the exact title. If that's what the results are suggesting, they'd have to type in the exact title of the show, in some cases at least, to be able to get that title to pull up. And that might be a frustrating experience. I don't know if there's a way to loosen up the parameters or something along those lines. Bryan, I think you'd be the expert here.
How many results are being returned right now, Bryan?
I'd have to look back at the API to see how many we're returning total. I'm limiting them to 10 here, so we can return more. But I could see what the default is. If you give me a second, I can confirm that.
And that likely would not change the ordering, right? It would just kick back more results, but wouldn't shuffle the results.
Correct. And this is the same search. I'll add this. We're making the same API request as the advertiser podcast lookup. So it's the same endpoint, same calls.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So it is working well in that context. So when people are searching up to run an ad on Buzzsprout ads, they're finding their podcasts usually consistently. That's not a big pain point for support-wise, that they're not able to find their podcast.
Now, again, they are typing in there, so they probably know exactly what to type.
It is their podcast, right? They should know the name of it.
I wonder with Jordan's. Like, can you? Yeah, it finds the exact match, but it's interesting. Yeah, it doesn't show for Dreamful.
Yeah. All right, so it does feel like there's a little bit of a technical constraint here, and that we're only able to utilize the API endpoints that are provided to us by the podcast index. And so it sounds like there's two options. One, the one you're using now, which is more broad, or a more limited one, which would be title only, in which case we think we might miss out on people who are searching for like podcaster names that aren't in the podcast title. So, I mean, I think this is the right call to go a little broad, because at least it gives you something else to search by. Like, I typed Dreamful, I couldn't find Jordan's podcast, but I know Jordan Blair, so let me type that and see if I can find it. You would find it that way if I didn't remember the full name is Dreamful Bedtime Stories. So, does that align with what your gut's telling you, Cameron?
I think so. Short history of could be an anomaly. I think we're going to run into issues like that, no doubt. But if we're going for breadth, then to be able to do both hosts and title, it seems like that's the right way to go.
Right. But maybe what it's telling us is we need to be more clear. Dave, can you click on add again? Mm-hmm. On what we're telling them to type in here? We need to be really clear about not just search for a podcast you'd like to recommend. Maybe there's another line below that says, podcast title and possibly full title is recommended to find the podcast you're looking for, or something like that. We can work on some copy around that. But
Dave, just to kick the tires on that, if you do short history Noiser as the publisher, does that, you know that short history doesn't bring it back, but short history and Noiser, does that bring it back? Get rid of the dot and just do short history Noiser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you didn't know the host, maybe you know the publication, the publisher. Again, I don't like these exceptions where they're going to run into what I ran into today, testing that. But I don't think we're going to find a perfect solution here. So it feels like breadth is the better way to go.
Yeah.
With the instructions, like you're saying, maybe beneath that title or beneath the search box before they start typing.
Okay.
All
right.
To quickly follow up, it looks like we're returning 60 results. That's the limit the API returns. And then I'll also add that the API calls that we're making, we've added the and similar parameter, which sort of broadens that title search. So that's something we've added that's like an option.
Okay. So there's a possible technical exploration to be done around not having that option on there to see if it still gives us kind of like title and maybe artist or podcast author and maybe some description. Like, I don't know, maybe explore what that option is adding and seeing if we really need it or not. And let me ask you this. Is there a technical reason or a design reason why, if we're getting 60 results, why are we limiting to 10? I mean, I'm assuming that box looks scrollable, right? We could have 60, right?
Yeah, we could put 60 in it. The only reason I limited it to 10 was because it felt a little unruly inside the modal. Like, it is scrollable, but it was like scrolling quite a bit. Whereas 10 felt like, if you didn't get it in the first 10 results, you probably want to research anyways, or refine your search, get more specific, that kind of thing.
Are there any performance constraints that you were considering in terms of returning 60 versus 10?
No, not really. We're lazy loading the images. So that's the only thing that's sort of like, if you load 60 images and you have to download 60 images, that could stink. But since we're lazy loading them, I don't think there's a big performance hit. We're already pulling back all the data. It's just a matter of what do we want to display.
Lazy loading being just fetching more images as you scroll, correct?
Yeah, as they enter the screen and they're visible, they'll download as you scroll.
Okay. All right. While you have this up, Dave, can you click on add a podcast and just don't do anything else? I just want to see this interaction.
You mean like actually add it?
Oh, you just exited. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like, as best I can tell in the screen share, the search results disappear. I saw a loading icon and then the whole modal disappears. And then the new podcast is added. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Now hit add again. Okay, start typing the name of a podcast. Yeah, not going to find that. There it is. Okay, Joe Rogan. Now hit the X in the top right.
Ooh, now you want me to click add again?
Yeah, you know where I'm going. Pop it back open.
Yeah, it keeps that search there. Looks like it doesn't clear it out when you cancel it. It does if you create one.
Right. Is this intentional or non-intentional?
I don't think we gave it a ton of thought of like Xing it and trying another one. We put the thought into, I created one, I create another one. We don't want to see the same result again. So yeah, this was probably just one of those we haven't, thought through that one yet. So I don't see there being a big win on keeping it there. If you exit, you're probably done. if you start again, obviously if you refresh the page, it'll be a new one. But if you came back to it again, I don't see it needing to show those same results again. I don't think so. So we can, as long as it's pretty easy, we should probably clear it out as well.
Is it the same behavior if you don't click the X, if you just click off of the modal? Can you dismiss it that way?
I would assume so. I could say pot news.
Yeah, that'll be the same behavior.
So, yeah.
Okay. So Cameron, from a usability perspective, you prefer this or would you prefer it cleared out?
Oops. Sorry about that.
I think it would depend on how I'm using this. I don't think there's going to be a perfect solution here. What I mean by that is, let's say I've got 5 already and I start typing another, and for whatever reason I've forgotten, oh, did I already add that one? So I X out, oh, I didn't add that one. I open it again, boom, it's ready to go. Is that going to be a common use case? No, but I just wonder that there might be situations where you won't mind having that form filled in the next time you relaunch it. I think once you've successfully added a podcast, so add that podcast and then let's see what happens. I think it clears out, right? So if I add this, then I tap the add button again, then it clears out. That would be my expected. Yeah, so this acts the way I expected. But if I hadn't actually added something, I don't think I'd be annoyed at all if I reopened the modal and I saw the list that was there previously.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's a really good way to think it through. And I think I'm in the same place. I think I'd almost kind of like having the ability to just move the modal out of the way for a second.
Yeah.
And then pop it right back up.
Now one thing that we some people we had already talked about a little bit was, let's say you've already added Buzzcast. Like, this probably shouldn't say add podcast anymore. This could either say already added and it's not a button, or remove, because you can remove it from here. But there should be, some indication that it's already back there. Like, you shouldn't have to close it. And because again, what would happen if we try and add it? It's going to add it again. It's going to blow up. It's going to do nothing. So I think that we can use this space a little bit better if they've already added one, either just to remind them in some way it's already added.
Agreed. And I'm kind of back and forth on the idea of writing that it's already added, or I don't know if there's a better way to say that, but then doing a small link beneath that to remove. It feels handy, but it doesn't feel appropriate in that. Why would anyone look to this be the place to remove a podcast? Like, you clicked a button to add. I don't think we would ever start your remove action by clicking something to add. And so it makes me feel like we would just be jumping through that extra hoop to add confusion to the UI instead. Now, I do think that's worth talking about, is that how do you remove something? Because right now I do see the link, but it's kind of small. And so in and of itself, is the remove process clear enough, or do we need to?
Yeah, I can speak to that real quick. I think the remove has been right now, like, we close the window, it has a remove under each one. I think right now the remove has kind of been we know we need to do it. Here's an unintrusive way to do it. Is it the best? I don't know. I did flirt around in the designs of, like, you hover over it and there's an X, and things like that where you can click on and delete it. You run into things with different background colors and all kinds of stuff. You can try and make it as good as you want. Will we have, problems with just different colors and things like that? Should we have an icon over here? This was definitely thought through for its functionality, but hasn't had a ton of time of, what's the best way to do that, which I think we can still spend some time on, maybe to make this a little bit nicer, then remove a little bit better. Maybe there's a trash can icon, maybe there's an X icon, things like that make it a little more obvious, where it's not just, it's another line of text to have to read, and stuff like that. So I'd be up for input right now for sure. If anything kind of, what people are thinking about this right now.
I had a question and some feedback on the modal, so we'll go back to that in just a second since we're on remove. I do have some thoughts here. I think the way you have it right now, it's functional. I think it would work. Okay, if we shipped it like this. I do think you could do maybe a couple small things that would help enhance this. And before I say that, there are a number of ways to do something as simple as this remove link. Like you were saying, you could do it exactly as we're seeing. It's a text link. We could do it as a trash icon, right? We could do it as like a shaded box where it has remove in the center and maybe even the word remove with the trash icon, right? And then it's like really in your face at that point. So I think it's a matter of balancing how much does it need to be in your face, how much does it not need to be there. Mm-hmm. My guess is you could do two things to help this stick out just a little bit more without throwing it in your face. One, you could turn that text to red. I think because you have it keep it as a small size, that red text, I don't think it's going to be glaring. It is an important action if you're looking for it. And I think you could just move that text down a little bit from the host name, just maybe a few pixels to help, again, distance that a little bit from that. That would help hierarchy-wise, make it more visible to your eyes. I think while you're at it, you could probably add like 2 pixels of spacing between the podcast title and the hosts to, again, provide just a little bit of breathing room. But if you want to make this stand out a little bit more without going over the top, I think red text, a few pixels from the rest of the text above it, and that might be adequate. You could probably play around with this in Inspector, right? And do all of these things on the fly and see how that feels without even having to get in the actual code and make these changes and save and so forth. So I think with just a few small changes, you're going to get there. Mm-hmm. I would caution us to avoid the hover technique, right? Because anytime we get into hovers showing an action, then we immediately block out mobile, right? That you couldn't do this on a mobile device because you can't do a hover. So with the deleting, with like any dragability type of things, we want to make sure that we avoid that, assuming that people would want to do this on their mobile devices as well.
Yeah.
Great. And then Cameron, you said something about the modal while that was open. You had some comments on it?
Sure. Anything else on remove before we go there? Okay. I'd like to hear your input on this, Dave and Bryan, and that is, I think there are at least 2 ways, but I think there are 2 fundamental ways that when you open this modal and you add a podcast, so go ahead and open up that modal again, if you would, that once I add any of these podcasts, there are, again, at least 2 major ways to have the follow-up action execute. One is to add podcast that closes the modal, and you see that where you've added it. The other is to add the podcast, and it checks it off, right? It changes that button to like a grayed out button that says added. And I think those are solving 2 different use cases, right? Where the first one is it's leaning into, they add a podcast, they want to see that in their Podroll, and so the add and then close would be the most obvious way to do that. The other scenario is they've just started the process and they want to add like 5 podcasts. It's going to be a little bit annoying to tap add podcast. It closes, you have to reopen it, etc., versus being able to do it all inline. So there's some pros and cons with that, with both of those approaches. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I would say, I think for me on the, I would say usability side or whatever, like, again, it is simple, like add, you type it in, it adds it, it closes, you see it, you add another one. I think obviously that's really simple for people. I think that suits our audience really well because, again, the hard part is the first time they do it, I love that it closes and they can see what just happened. After you get into the 3rd, 4th, 5th, it's like, okay, I could see them getting the hang of this and wanting to like knock it out. The one thing that I would lean toward being okay with it closing every time is my gut tells me they're going to add like 4 to 6 or 2 to, they're not going to add 20. And once they get their handful done, they're done. Like they might not ever come back for 6 months. So I think if this was a different tool where you're constantly going to be doing things and you get the habit of it and you want to do it again, maybe something like chapter markers we have where it's more just like, you're going to be doing it every episode, every time, like then maybe, yeah. Because once they get the hang of it, it would be nice if it was faster. But part of me feels like it's okay that it closes every time and they have to open it again. Because I think it takes 2, obviously 2-3 times to get, that quick hang of it or whatever. But I think they're almost done then. So part of me feels okay in this situation that it closes every time. So that was kind of the thinking. I mean, I agree that there can be nice things of like adding it and then typing in, adding it, speeds it up. But I just don't know if it's necessary to add that a little bit of unknown the first time or two they do it to know what's happening, to make it like a lot faster when they might only add 6 ever. So.
Bryan, would you agree, differ?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I mentioned this to Dave during the implementation of like, do we want to close it every time? Like, is it going to be annoying? And I think I agree with Dave. After feeling it, after using it, it was like, oh, it is nice to see the podcast get added to your Podroll and sort of see the results. I'll also say that when we built it, because it felt good, sort of like over engineering the different interactions or feeling out other sort of usability options. We decided to hold off and see what the feedback was before we started to go down a rabbit hole, because it can be easy to sort of get lost on like exploring different options especially on modals, because they're just sort of a little bit of a different beast when it comes to implementation details.
Sure.
How the form resets and such.
Yeah, I think if I can just real quick on that, I would agree that like it felt good enough to not have to like, should we try and make it different? It felt good enough. Again, so we didn't put a ton of time into like thinking about building that other interaction. But I will say it felt good this way. So let's see what we think and maybe get some of our creators or other people to play with it really quickly to see how it felt. And again, I think just people, our podcasters or any podcasters, I think are going to click and like, oh, there's this cool big image and artwork that looks great. Let me add another one. Like every time they get to see the page change a little bit, which is little, but I mean, I think people can like that.
Yeah. I think maybe to add to what both of you were saying, and we don't need to spend much more time on this, but I think it is an important point, and that is kind of our ethos for Buzzsprout is to favor clarity over power usage, right? And so the second example would be power usage. They just want to rattle off a ton of podcasts and add them, but that suffers for the person doing this for the first time, right? They have no idea what a blog roll is, Podroll, et cetera. Let's make it clear first. And then if they get annoyed, the power users over not being able to do multiple podcasts, we can address that issue later. So I think in my eyes, it feels like the right decision you've made here. One last thing on this modal while we have it open. Can you type just one character at a time? Just do a space right there. Yeah, just a space and then maybe another character. I'm seeing this modal like refresh the entire modal, and it resizes, it collapses, then it expands again. That feels a little, disjointed. It feels like we need to like keep the height open or something along those lines that would help it not be flashing on and off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think in the design, again, design is easy. I think the modal was a certain height, and then like it showed 5.5 results, so you could see there's other ones down there that you could scroll in. So there's, if we wanted to do where the modal is a certain height always, and then so it's not growing and stuff like that, you might just maybe have to limit the amount of results you show so they know they can scroll. So is that kind of what you mean? Like, so it would, the modal would always have a certain height, so it wouldn't be kind of changing and moving and going away and
I think
refresh.
So. And those are the trade-offs that we have to make developing this, right? Because to make that look smoother, it's not like just a couple lines of code and it's done, right? That might involve restricting the height and then having some placeholder, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. That starts adding up along with all of the other things that we've already been talking about. The changes and revisions you guys might make, I think you just need to calculate that into the overall investment of time going into this and whether or not that's a worthwhile change to make. I think I'm just reacting. I'm giving you my reaction, right? My eyes are seeing it flash on and off, and so I'm giving you that reaction as to how my brain is processing this.
Yeah, that is good. That's bothering me a little bit also, and it's probably amplified by the fact that the screen share is a little slow. Mm-hmm. But I imagine if it gets faster, the flashes are just going to be faster, but they're still there. So I do think that's something that could be optimized for sure.
And that's all I've got on the modal, I think.
Okay, let's see. Dave, we interrupted you, but you were going to show us the remove workflow.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think right now it's very simple in that you hit remove, drops in a modal. Are you sure you want to remove this recommended podcast? You click remove or cancel, and once you hit remove, it just pulls it out and all that kind of stuff. So right now there is a confirmation. I think some people added, do we need a confirmation since it's so easy? I kind of think you still need to. I don't think it hurts anything. It helps people, in the case they accidentally clicked it, it's probably not bad to have. So very...
This harkens back to the point that Cameron just made. And I almost found myself going in the other direction now on this issue, like the power use versus the clarity. And I think you're saying, yeah, this is clarity, and this is people not making a mistake. But I'm always wondering if it's an opportunity to say, like, I don't know. To me, these big icons, it reminds me of like the dock on iOS where you drag stuff out and you get the little poof, and it almost like makes you want to drag more stuff off your bar just to see the poof. Even you're like, oh, it's something I actually use, but I just want to poof it away anyway.
I just want to see the animation.
Right, now I got to figure out how to get it back. But I wonder, is there an opportunity here for some delight? Like, is there some sort of transition that you guys can do where it shrinks down into itself or something like that, where it's actually, it's a nice little interaction. And you guys have done such a great job of making it simple to add. It's fun. Like, I come in here, I'll remove that one, add a new one. Because the process is fun, it encourages me to seek out new podcasts to add to my Podroll.
I mean, you say that, and again, maybe this might have been what you're saying. I'd rather put the time into making it look fun when they add it instead of deleting it.
Yeah, but maybe both.
True. Yeah, I mean,
whatever you come up with, one would relate to the other one.
Sure. Yeah, if you could do something nice to show it, or it builds in, or it does some nice animation or something reveal, if we can keep it simple that makes sense for just the size of this project, could be fun. Yes, that they could. Because again, you don't want them to be like, oh, it's so cool to remove. Let me remove more. Obviously, that's funny. But
and I think too, if it's fun to remove, it feels a little less like permanent, or like you have to exercise caution. Are you sure you want to remove this? If it's fun, it's like, oh, whoops, I removed that. Let me just go add it back. That might make it feel a little less permanent.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask, do we even need the confirmation modal? Is it that disastrous of an action that we have to have an interstitial modal to confirm versus just like deleting it with some nice, delightful animation? Are we far enough along with like view transitions, browser, the category of view transitions, some new technology that we could leverage these here? Or is that a different category of technology?
I think view transitions are...
Is that page?
I could be wrong, but I think they're only in Chrome right now. Is that
okay?
I can double check and make sure, but it would be nice to add if we're okay with, only having the nice transitions on Chrome. It'd be a fun exploration. But yeah, I can confirm that. I'm not 100%.
I think the only reason I would opt to try and maybe keep the delete or the remove is because everywhere in the app right now that we remove or delete, we have them. We wanted to confirm it. So I don't know if I want to break convention. So they think, oh, somewhere over here, I don't know if I can undo. I don't know if this is a confirmation or not. But this one is like that'd be the maybe my strongest thing is just consistency in the rest of the app. Even though this is this is not an episode you're deleting by any means. This is not a big deal. You can add it back, no problem. But I just didn't know if that would get a little bit in the way of how we usually remove and how they get used to removing things and how it works. That would kind of be, and maybe for mobile, you touch your finger in the wrong spot. Again, no big deal, but you're like, oh, I just deleted it. So that might be the one main reason I would say maybe the confirmation can be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Dave, the concept of consistency in my mind, like we should be building consistency around the concept of we're never going to do anything destructive without you confirming. Not everything you do, we're confirming. Like, that's too much consistency. But the consistency we want to build is that Buzzsprout has built a UI that I won't do anything destructive or, that will require a lot of time for me to undo without confirming it with me. in that case, this doesn't fall into that category for me. So
yeah,
at least conceptually, I'm not like saying we have to go this direction, but I lean more in line with what Cameron is saying. Does it feel like overkill to confirm this? Probably does. Probably just wipe it out and let them add it back if they made a mistake.
Dave, to your point, I did have a similar question along the lines of consistency. The decisions we have to make designing UIs, because my feedback for the add button, this is shifting gears for just a moment, but it relates to what you just said. The add button, as you showed us earlier, that add button, meaning the plus, the green plus, the add text in bold, and then the small text beneath it, is leveraging a pattern that we've used elsewhere on the site. But in the context here, I found my eyes wanting to see add a podcast in bold as the text here. But that would break the convention of how we're doing this add pattern elsewhere on the site. So it's not my recommendation necessarily that we do that. I just think it's calling out and recognizing that we sometimes have to make exceptions, whether or not this is an exception to make. And one of those exceptions, with the add button, but another exception is the one you were just talking about, whether or not we have those modals everywhere, or to Kevin's point, if it's really, we need a confirmation when it's going to do something that's difficult to redo or undo. So, but I think, your perspective is the right one. Let's be as consistent as possible, and then break the rules, so to speak, when it makes sense to do so.
Sure.
Okay, so we're coming up on time here, so let's move quick through the last few parts. One concern that was raised, Dave, I think you mentioned this, was to reorder these, you drag them around. You said you're still having conversations or discussions around that not being clear, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it is just that idea of, you can click on them and they launch the page that we ever want to take them to with that podcast, but it seems very unintuitive that you can drag it by any, it's like, oh, cool, I can drag it. Like, we could write about it. We could do like a little blurb, or we could add some text above it, or we can add visual cues where, again, I agree with Cameron, like once you start doing a hover, you kind of now what do I do how do I communicate this in mobile? If you don't, like at one point I had a hover icon that hovers up and, I can drag, cool. Is it something that's always there on each one? I think those were the only, I don't think moving them is that, here's the thing, I guess, is moving around that important that we want to make sure they know they can. And if it is, okay, then let's try is there visual cues that we can do on once on a page, or should we it should be on it should show up always, not even over hover or something? Anyways, yeah. I think it's up for discussion on how best to handle that now that we're seeing it.
Yeah. So, I think you guys will work that problem. I agree with you that I think it is a problem. And I want to answer your question of how important is it to reorder these things. I think that's very important from a product perspective. We don't know exactly how people are going to use Podrolls yet, but my hope is that they will use them in all sorts of creative ways, including like, hey, send a boost to my podcast episode and I'll put you in my Podroll for a week, or things like that. And so I imagine, I think about us on Buzzcast, we're going to be doing stuff like that. We're going to say, hey, if you boost us, we're going to add you to our Podroll for a week. I don't know that I'm going to add them in the first spot or the last spot or whatever, but I'm going to add them somewhere. And so reordering, I think, is important to us. I think we'll probably always list our shows first, but anybody who boosts us, we'll put them down there. But I would want it to be clear that it's something you can do, even if it's not something you do on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And if I can tell you how I discovered that you could actually drag these, I didn't know you could drag these on this screen. I pulled it up on mobile, and as I was scrolling down, I accidentally dragged one of the images, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? And then I realized, it's draggable. Great. So yeah, however we can make that clear without relying on a hover that you can drag these. It sounds like you've already thought through a couple of ideas. I think that would help. I think it would be very helpful because, again, I didn't even know you could drag these on this screen until I accidentally did it on mobile. I do think while we're on that topic, take a look at mobile, because as I was scrolling, I found myself dragging more than I was actually scrolling. So I think we need to figure out, do we limit the dragability to say a quarter of the artwork and maybe it has the drag icon with a lightly shaded background or something like that? Because my thumb kept dragging artwork rather than scrolling down to see my list. It was really kind of an awkward, unintentional interaction.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you guys are QA testing, scrolling up and down and across rows and columns. Like right now, we're only looking at one row of podcasts.
Yeah, it works. It works pretty. It doesn't.
Yeah, we're using a pretty well-defined sorting library called Sortable JS. And so far, it's felt pretty good. Although Cameron and I had the same issue when I was QA testing it this morning on mobile. It's like, oh, I keep getting stuck. I couldn't scroll when I'd expect to scroll. So that's good feedback.
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's tackle a couple other quick topics, and then we all need to get back to it. So we looked at mobile for a second. Let me ask you a technical question about the RSS feed that is getting updated as these changes are being made, correct?
Yeah, it will be. It's a change that I'm still working on. So it's local. It hasn't been deployed to staging yet, but yeah, that'll all be the same.
So one of the ideas that we mentioned in the pitch was the idea of including the iTunes ID in the tag itself. Has that been, you guys thought through that yet, or posted anything about it in the namespace project?
No, not yet. We do get the iTunes ID back from the podcast API, so it's something we would have to store. But if that is something we want to add, then yeah, I'll have to store that in the database for the RSS.
Okay. So let's follow up on that asynchronously in Basecamp. We'll figure out what we want to do there. And the last part of this that we should probably take a little bit of time to look at is, Dave, can you show us what's happening on the public website?
Yeah, so when you have them down here, we put them at the bottom right now, or at least, what we have now is we have it at the bottom of each episode page. I felt that putting it there at, felt like the right place at, for first off, just because that's, it kind of accompanies an episode you're listening to, things like that. I did explore putting it on the homepage. Part of the page doesn't work, but putting it on the homepage and just having a new tab where it has like co-hosts and things like that, having a recommended podcast tab, it still feels right, but it feels pretty buried. That's pretty, I don't know if anyone would ever notice that. So I feel like putting it on here would be the right thing. And I put it at the bottom for right now. I explored putting it in our, sometimes we have our sidebar that we use for sponsors and things like that, but that design felt very like, tiny artwork, these little links. It seemed just very tucked, it just seemed very minimal and hard to really see, where people I think are used to seeing big artwork, and kind of bigger artwork with smaller titles, just that way podcasts work. So I just wanted to seem secondary information at the bottom, near the bottom, and things like that. And maybe some sort of other title instead of Podrolls for the listener. I don't know if we need to educate them on what a Podroll is instead of like recommended podcasts or other podcasts you might enjoy, or do we need to write something that makes it feel more like from the podcaster instead of these are like just randomly put in there by whoever, and it's just here's other things you should try.
Okay, question: are we going to truncate these podcast titles or author tags at any
Right
point?
now, I don't. So right now we don't. And again, it's, I've used ones that I know that are probably understand good ideas of short titles, short authors. So I'm sure there's going to be some that could blow it up. So we could look at doing these of, 2 lines or, 2 lines out of max or something like that, a certain amount of characters. So we could definitely look into that if we want to try. If we think it's worth solving right now, which it can't hurt. So that might be the best way to go.
Okay. All right. Title wise, I mean, I'm coming around to this idea of like, we could do Podroll. I think you could. And then you could, we need to explain a little more out here to general podcast audiences that these are other podcasts recommended by the hosts of this show or something like that.
I mean, you could
design
make it a
wise, I don't know
little
if it's in the same line, or I don't know if you want to make that 2 lines. What are you saying, Dave?
I was just going to say, you could, you know, when I thought about getting personal, you could say like my Podroll, and then you could maybe a line underneath it, like you said, explaining it, where you at least start making it more personal. Like, these are my recommendations or my things.
Yeah, I do like that. So many podcasts, though, have more than one host. And so it feels weird for Buzzcast to have my Podroll. It's like the Buzzcast Podroll.
True. Yeah.
But we
Yeah, I
probably
think we have
don't
to stay away
want
from
the
that.
Buzzcast Podroll again, because if the name of your show was the How I Built This with Guy Raz Podroll, it's super long. So let's think through that. But I like kicking around this concept of how can we make Podroll a term that people know and understand, and knowing that it's going to take some time. So we'll have to overly explain it for a while. But it might be the right way to go. And then Cameron, Dave, and Bryan, you guys obviously probably going to talk about the truncation issue, long podcast title issue. But yeah, that's all. That's my list. Cameron, do you have anything else that we should touch on?
No, not for this review. I mean, there's some other things that we might sync on later, but this is great. I mean, it was just days ago that this was a sketch, and now we're seeing it and playing around with it. This is fun to see.
Yeah, I agree. You guys have done great work. This is a fun project, and I can't wait for our customers to get in and start using it. All right. Unless there's any other questions, I think we're good. All right.
I think we can follow. I'll have a few questions asynchronously, but thanks for the feedback, guys. This was a really good review.
Yeah. It's an awesome project. Great work, guys.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Talk soon.
Thanks all.